Good morning. Thanks for being here with us today. First of all, I want to apologize. Technology played a trick on us and we had to switch platforms. So thanks to everyone that logged in to this new platform. We have an engaging conversation with our colleague, Tom Bull. Tom Bull leads the fintech efforts in the UK. He is not only a great guy, but an amazing source of information on fintech. And he will share with us perspectives on global trends, as well as information on hot startup. And then we will finally have some time for questions at the end of this conversation. Please let us know of any questions you might have. And with that being said, go ahead, Tom.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Rodolfo. Let me turn to the slides and kind of add to that introduction. So how I plan to use the time in this session is I'll make a kind of brief personal introduction and intro to the fintech team from the UK, the kind of areas we are working on at the moment and helping clients with. We'll talk through some of the key sector trends that we see really shaping our work. Probably do a bit more of a kind of deep dive on the topic of open banking, which has been a really significant focus in the UK. There's been a very particular UK approach there, and hopefully that will be kind of interesting and insightful. And then really turn to a couple of the real hotspots that are driving a lot of our kind of client activity at the moment. So hopefully that will be kind of a good kind of overview of what we're seeing and what we're learning from the UK market. Sorry, the slide updates a little slowly, but there we go. So a little bit more about our kind of UK practice. We wear a number of hats, kind of as we say in the UK, serving fintech clients in the UK. I'm responsible for helping kind of high growth, scaling fintechs. The names like Revolut, Starling, Monzo, Funding Circle, to kind of grow and scale their businesses through providing a whole range of our services into those organizations as they scale to help them do that effectively. But we see our role in the fintech market as being a little broader than that, because in the UK sector, we found a whole range of interesting enterprise grade platforms, tools, technologies that are helping our more traditional clients to solve business challenges or bring new propositions to market more quickly or more effectively. And we think there's an important role for us to be working alongside our clients in those situations, bringing the power of our consulting skill set and the kind of best of fintech from the technology market, and therefore we're spending a heap of time incubating and developing those kind of B2B relationships. And beyond all that, we see in the fintech market a real need to be active members of and supporters of the whole ecosystem. So we work on various projects with government, which I'll talk a bit more about later. We run a podcast which you can listen to on Apple Podcasts or Spotify called EY Fintech Beyond Borders. We run a kind of regular newsletter, within EY globally, etc. So we think it's important to share knowledge and stay super connected. So I've set out here, a number of things. Lots of this stuff's on our website. Active on our kind of thought leadership agenda, doing high quality research on the market. We've looked at trends like consumer adoption of fintech, kind of government interventions and work in the fintech space in the report called Moving Mountains, Moving Mainstream. We spend a heap of time, as the logos at the bottom left of the slide show, kind of actually helping and working with fintechs on their growth and scaling journey. Just called out a number of our kind of clients we've worked with there. We think it's important to kind of build our knowledge assets. Notably, we have a tool called Embryonic that we use for kind of fintech scanning and kind of horizon scanning and market mapping. That's kind of included there at the top right. And then at the bottom right there, as I said, very active in the ecosystem, most notably perhaps with UK trade or memberships association called Innovate Finance. But with a number of others all across Europe as well, and we find it in every market it's kind of important to work with those organisations that become kind of the voice of the industry on a number of important topics. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour from where we're coming from, and hopefully in the next 30 or 40 minutes I'll be able to give you more of a kind of flavour for why I'm really excited about and passionate about the UK sector. So let's move on. I'll cover some of the key kind of trends. Hopefully that's kind of visible. It's a little small on my screen, but I can talk it through in any case. So probably the number one kind of area at the minute is we're seeing just huge interest from the international investor community in the fintech market. We've seen fintechs raising huge kind of Series B rounds with what were traditionally some of the big kind of private equity type investors through their growth funds or even through their main technology funds, writing roughly $100 million checks to Series B-ish size companies to really support them as soon as they've come out of the scale up and into the real the startup and into the real scale up kind of stage of the journey. So huge wave of kind of interest from some slightly traditional financial sponsors in some instances. We've seen kind of the first real wave of kind of stock market listings from fintech. So in the last few months, we've seen Pension B, which is a pension workplace pension aggregator, Wise, which you may well know, the kind of international money transfer business, more historically, Funding Circle in the small business loan segment. So we've seen that kind of rise of kind of listings, and we've seen the UK government has set out its stall as wanting to really kind of evolve the UK listing environment to make it more attractive for kind of high growth firms and fintech firms in particular looking to list. So we had a kind of UK report called the Hill Review, which is kind of looking at that and looking in detail at some of the differences between London listing and the US and some of the Asian markets to kind of really hone in on areas that can be improved. I guess next up, our second point, real focus on the whole topic of ecosystems, which is kind of a super broad terminology. And frankly, our conversations in the kind of financial ecosystem space when it comes to fintech, they range from the really sound, I think, and really commercially viable through to the kind of really vague and a bit more kind of ephemeral. So of course we've seen through the growth of e-commerce companies, in particular, and the growth of the tech sector, a real recognition from fintechs there's a need to provide financial services to those wider economy firms through high quality APIs and a really good kind of as a service type interface or payments as a service type interface. So some real high quality, high growth platforms operating that way, and there's some obvious kind of product synergies. So it clearly makes sense to form ecosystems where customer need dictates that adjacent products which are not available from one platform but through partnership could be offered. Kind of makes sense. But at the more vague end, we've also seen a lot of businesses that have struggled to make traction initially turn to the idea that they could be an as-a-service player or suddenly flip their model to be a kind of a more marketplace model as a kind of solution to their lack of growth, without really recognizing that to be the player in this kind of ecosystem needs that real focus on the quality of the commercial proposition, the quality of the partnership kind of thinking, and the quality of the availability of the whole organization to kind of offer services very efficiently and effectively through a kind of a digitized interface with a partner. So it's kind of a whole bit of a mixed bag, I think, in that kind of ecosystem segment. We've seen our third point, a real kind of struggle for talent in the UK. We've seen clearly we've had Brexit, and that's caused some kind of headwinds as European talent has either left the UK market or been less attracted to move to the UK to work in the UK fintech sector, which is a real challenge for a sector that in its DNA is absolutely European and feels European in its outlook. So lots of kind of focus from government around development of a new scale-up visa mechanism to help address that, and on kind of focus on working with universities and academia to kind of help to build up the talent base. Digitization, I guess it's a common thing to say, but certainly been an experience in the UK that the pandemic has been an accelerator of digitization. So we saw during the crisis 6 million UK customers download apps from their bank for the first time. And we've seen that a real strain that the uptick in demand has put on contact estates of major institutions. So focus on digitizing of workflow and of service models as a method of kind of addressing that. I think as people are emerging from this period, and hopefully we're getting more towards the stage that we can more confidently say we're kind of emerging from that difficulty. The kind of international agenda has come back into play, and we've seen firms that are well funded, have got good product market fit, and are keen to kind of export their expertise more globally. So increasingly having conversations with clients around international expansion and the bringing some of our kind of strategic rigor to those international expansion conversations around suitable addressable markets, understanding the key trends, the competitor landscape, and going from a long list of kind of ideas to a more shorter and more kind of certain list of kind of markets to target. And lastly, a big feature of our work in the UK is really supporting fintechs to kind of bring some real rigor and focus to their finance and risk and financial crime, in particular back office functions, and often in the kind of quest for growth. Those fintech organizations have often really doubled down on the quality of the sales, the quality of the customer experience, the quality of the tech. And sometimes finance, risk, financial crime back office have been, a little bit neglected. So, we're seeing focus on hiring the right talent into those parts of the organizations, which of course is tough. Use of Regtech platforms, etc., to help upgrade and bring a technology edge to that work. Implementation of new systems, resourcing up. Use of big outsourcing partners, etc., to kind of augment and kind of remediate some difficulties in those areas. So that's kind of lots going on. We always kind of enjoy the kind of the need to keep up with the latest trends, given how quickly the market moves. But that's kind of many of the areas that have been shaping our work more recently. So moving on. I guess I wanted to kind of help characterize a bit of, how do we see or think kind of thematically about the kinds of players who are active in the UK market and start to put a bit of a kind of structure around that. So this is clearly just one view, but hopefully a helpful one. So at the top left, we see in the UK a really significant sector of large B2C fintechs. And these guys are often really setting the standard on experience and features. And the big traditional players are often kind of watching enviously at the speed of product development and new feature release by these players. So they tend to have brilliant user journeys, innovative products. Some of the firms have, faced a bit of headwind from the pandemic. A bit of suppression of consumer lending, reduced travel, and often the propositions were geared up around travel. Bit of a kind of disconnect in the small business lending sector because of government intervention schemes. They've had to work pretty hard, as I said, to grow their capabilities around the finance and risk functions, while also trying to make the best of data and drive automation. I call out services as a small business, or as we refer to them, SMEs, small and medium enterprises. That's a real hotspot. So firms like Monzo, Revolut, Starling, they're really kind of building out their propositions in that area. Everything from kind of basic small business bank accounts, but wrapping those kind of services more fully around the SME. What do they need in terms of setting up businesses, doing invoicing, having a basic accounting capability, filing their accounts, etc. So often the firms are trying to offer a much more holistic kind of solution for small businesses than the traditional banks. And many of those small businesses do feel they were clearly poorly served by the traditional players, and so it's kind of a more complex segment, and the fintechs are serving those needs. At the bottom left, we see a kind of set of almost kind of new core technology providers, so providing the core ledgers, the transaction processing capability. And working really differently than the traditional core platform players, which were really sold as packaged software solutions. So what we're seeing here is like fully cloud native, really built in a modular way using open source technology. So for example, that absolutely means that the product would, for example, be coded in Python, and the bank's tech team, with Python skills, would own the code of that product in a way that makes agile development and update to that way quicker and more possible than it was on a traditional packaged software solution. So we've seen lots of progress from these kind of players. We've seen Thought Machine working with Lloyds Banking Group, 10x Future Technologies with JP Morgan. Generally, what we've seen from these firms is there's very little out-of-the-box capability. So those programs, they're sizable change programs. They're good ones to get involved with. They bring a lot of partners to the table around those new kind of cloud core banking solutions. And often these kind of players start with a limited footprint. So it's one product in one market, or a new greenfield bank in part of the organization. But then over time, they're kind of building their footprint throughout these organizations. So at the top right, I've kind of put the payment space. And the space is extremely active, high growth, driven by the e-commerce boom, of course. Traditionally a segment that's been hungry for tech investment, and the banks, frankly, in the UK and Europe haven't always been best placed to really invest, fully in their kind of payments divisions. And often, in fact, the banks are kind of turning to these fintech players as key kind of providers of services. So many of these platforms, they're offering payments as a service, API enabled, full provisioning of payment scheme access, management, reconciliation. So it's almost like a full payments managed service. A number of these players are looking at new kind of payments rails. Most notably, we'll talk a bit more later about PSD2 payments, which are becoming a very credible alternative to card payments in the UK. And we've seen some huge fundraisers here, organizations like checkout.com with, circa $40 billion valuation. And lastly, a bunch of kind of supporting technologies that kind of sit around the core, providing a whole range of kind of supporting services to help businesses solve particular challenges in particular areas. So it can be stuff like data analysis and reporting capabilities, helping to manage regulations, helping to streamline processes or workflows or document intelligence. And these kind of players have normally got a pretty smart solution around integrating into legacy systems, providing data connectivity, orchestration, really helping firms realize the benefits of Regtech. So I think that's, four kind of distinctive areas that we see kind of activity in the UK really taking off. A key kind of feature of that is the real focus on partnership. So, we do operate in the UK really in an environment where the big banks in particular have very large customer bases, but are very kind of constrained in their ability to perform and really invest in R&D. So often want to kind of dip into fintech to access capability. We do sometimes find it's a little bit discussions with clients in this area feel like it's a bit like partnership for its own sake. People just want a partner because they've seen the fintech boom, they've seen a lot of good providers. They think partnership must be part of the answer, and what we're often saying is yes, but do adopt a structured thought process to that thinking, and I've kind of set that out on this slide. So we normally think it makes sense to anchor that thinking in an unmet customer need, or it could be an unmet kind of organizational need. Get really clear about what is that focus and that prioritization of focus, and then think really carefully about the capabilities. What capabilities do you have within the organization to fulfill that? Be realistic. And when we work with clients on this, try and use tools like kind of digital maturity kind of models to think through what is that capability and what are the gaps critically, because it's those what are those capability gaps? Well, clearly that's where there's a role for a partner, and we often work with clients to think through what are some of the attributes of a good partner for that. What might be even some of the kind of benchmark factors that will get you really confident that those attributes are good and therefore they're going to be a good partner. And we think if you work through that kind of mental framework, it probably helps to set up for success on partnership. So we've seen all sorts of stuff. We've seen kind of product partnerships. So in the UK is an organisation called Market Finance, which has got a single invoice financing product for small business. So they go to market with Barclays. Barclays has a good SME base, but doesn't have that product capability. We've seen some more technology stuff. An organisation called Flux, which integrates with merchant point of sale to bring like SKU level data, like all the detailed data from a kind of receipt from the till back in all the way into the bank, so you can get really rich data on your bank kind of statement or app, and lots of back office stuff. So a big reasonably high profile proposition is an organization called Quantex, working with particularly with HSBC, who invested in them around using network analytics to kind of reduce financial crime or kind of address challenges around other forms of risks. So we've seen kind of lots of good examples. Of course, it's still hard doing partnership, but lots of good examples. What sometimes people say, what actually is, what do you mean by partnership versus just working with tech, or working with a vendor? And I don't think it's that cut and dry, but we do tend to think of partnership as being, more collaborative, more focused on collective problem solving, less about, a kind of traditional packaged software sale or a kind of a packaged platform. Partnership has that kind of collaborative and shared kind of focus on a set of goals or objectives. So kind of big topic there. What's really certainly shaped a lot of our kind of work and thinking in the UK is this real focus that the government's had on the fintech sector. We've been very focused on helping and supporting them on that. We've done a couple of big reports that are online. The first one was called Fintech on the Cutting Edge. It was in 2016. And then the second one's called Moving Mountains, Moving Mainstream in sort of 2019. And what particularly that latter report helped to trigger was the launch of this thing called the Khalifa Review, where the government asked Ron Khalifa, the WorldPay founder, to undertake a review of the sector and kind of make some recommendations. And how this worked, when we first started doing these benchmarks, we really focused on and talked about what are the attributes of a good fintech ecosystem. And we talked about availability of talent, of capital, of the policy and regulatory environment, and of the kind of level of demand, both from customers and institutions. And over time, those broad pillars of policy thinking have been maintained, although Khalifa evolved that a little bit, looked at international attractiveness and competitiveness of the market as a pillar, thought a lot about national connectivity in the UK. We always have this issue of kind of London running at one speed or in one context, and other parts of the UK, seemingly, running differently. So basically 5 chapters in Khalifa: regulation, international, national, skills and talent, investment. Each of those led by a senior figure from the industry. So someone who kind of ran that work stream and really got to grips with what were some of the key outstanding challenges, what was some of the global best practice, and what were a small set of recommendations that could be made to help kind of move the UK sector forward. So some examples were like a cryptocurrency task force. Given we haven't had that much of an effort on crypto at the point this report was published. Addressing the kind of regulatory cliff edge that we see for scale-up firms as they come out of the kind of sandbox phase of regulation and they start to go up into more complex regulation. It feels like a significant kind of difference in the level of support available, and therefore steps to address that. And as I mentioned earlier, recognising the challenges the UK's had around talent in the aftermath of Brexit, a specific kind of scale-up visa that really is designed to address the needs of fintech firms. So all in all, I mean, this is all available online. If you Google the Khalifa Review, you can see there were each of the 5 work streams were around 3 recommendations. So it's kind of 15 good ideas in there, which clearly get kind of implemented to slightly kind of differing degrees. But beyond all those recommendations, I think what, particularly a government-sponsored review led by a very senior and respected industry figure that really draws in execs from across the industry to share ideas and get collaborative on problem solving. It really had this kind of unifying and energizing effect on the sector, particularly, after Brexit. So it felt like, a real kind of renewed momentum and kind of renewed focus on moving the sector forward. Well, there's one other big idea in here, which was kind of over and above those 15 recommendations. It was the idea of creating a new centre for finance, innovation, and technology for the UK. And the report kind of showed that all across UK government, lots of departments have a fintech person. There are numerous membership associations, there are kind of promotional agencies, there are local municipalities. And when there's kind of some thorny challenges to be addressed that need a bit of new policy, some new technology, some good industry collaboration, it can be hard to get all that happening together without an orchestrating body. So the idea of CFIT is, to be engaged in more kind of constructive problem solving and an approach that kind of works across government and public sector. So CFIT was kind of announced in the review. It hasn't come to fruition yet. I think a lot of people in the sector are kind of really looking for this joined up, collaborative, constructive problem solving, where government gets involved and private sector gets involved. And so there's a lot of anticipation at the moment of the launch of the CFIT Centre probably in the autumn. So let's move on. I think the next point I was keen to make in the UK market, we've seen huge interest, particularly from the kind of aligned to the IPO story, the kind of what we call SPAC or blank check companies. So we've heard from many of our fintech clients, they're being approached by kind of SPAC vehicles with a view to acquiring them and kind of accelerating the route to public markets. Unsurprisingly, we spend a bit of time as well with the SPAC and SPAC sponsor community, working through where the real hotspots of the industry, where there are kind of the most credible firms to kind of potentially acquire, so we've done this analysis, looked at the kind of size criteria up the side, because most of the SPACs want to acquire kind of $1 billion plus businesses, because that fits with their capital profile and the kind of stage of evolution that they're looking for. And then actually how many opportunities are there in kind of various parts of the market. So we plotted that across the x-axis. Conscious of time, probably talked a lot about the payment space already. Maybe just call out non-bank lenders, kind of at the almost in the top right segment. So we, certainly seen, big customer demand for digital access, speed of decision making, sometimes quicker than what the banks can provide. And we've seen like pools of relatively low cost capital looking to support lending, from warehouse, credit hedge funds, etc. And a community of non-bank lenders that are often a bit quicker to innovate. They don't face the same legacy tech kind of challenges that the banks do. And actually, we've often seen commercial partnerships between banks and specialist lenders, providing a bit of the best of both worlds. So that's probably just one other sector to call out from that analysis. But that's how we've been kind of talking to that community about the kind of key investment hotspots. I'd love to move on probably to talk about open banking, because it provides in the UK a really important key kind of infrastructural component to the environment in which the UK fintechs operate. And we've seen really acutely in the fintech market, that digital tech connectivity, particularly powered by APIs, is really driving this kind of evolution of value chains, and the perimeter around firms and their distribution channels starts to shift as it becomes so much easier to move workloads or data kind of seamlessly between organizations. And I think open banking's, it's a super kind of interesting area of policy. It's actually aiming to put, as we frame it in the UK, put control of the data that the bank holds on the customers firmly into those customers' hands, as well as kind of opening up the ability to kind of trigger payments from the customer's preferred venue, third-party app, for example, not just in the home banking app. I guess the UK's got a bit of a unique story here, so I'll kind of outline a little bit of that for you. Just move the slide. I think the kind of heritage of open banking in the UK is kind of peculiar. So, sorry, I need to go back. Sorry. Yeah, okay. So, it kind of came from a whole range of sources. So at the top left is a really interesting report that really caught the eye of a lot of people in the UK early on. And it was actually commissioned by the Ministry of Finance on open banking and written by an organisation called Fingleton. It really laid a lot of the groundwork, setting out really compelling use cases and really making the case for the technical feasibility of open banking. So there were lots of use cases and a really strong kind of endorsement of that feasibility. So that was a really important early kind of milestone in kind of catalyzing thinking. Next, at the bottom left, we had a group called the Open Bank Working Group, and this was under the auspices of the Open Data Institute. The kind of institute set up by Tim Berners-Lee, the kind of inventor of the internet, that got together a group of bankers, fintechs, consultants, really to form a working group, with a bunch of really influential members to kind of set out the kind of core architecture or blueprint that standards could play in a kind of many-to-many networks. So this was a kind of more like a kind of real industry coming together piece. Then we saw intervention by the EU Commission. So the EU Commission explored themes around openness, data portability, and they really came to the fore in PSD2, the payments regulation, GDPR, the data regulation, and much as in the UK, people love to hate the EU Commission. The UK tends to also be very zealous adopters of European law, so we were very quick to kind of fully adopt those European laws. And then lastly, at the bottom right, there's interesting work by the UK antitrust regulator. And this was a really major, kind of intervention by them. They were very dissatisfied by the state of competition in the UK retail and small banking market. And it was them who actually decided to mandate the standardization of open banking, coming through that kind of antitrust lens. And lots of, that kind of thinking of standardization, it almost came from, competition theory of, they wanted to avoid this kind of so-called man in the middle competition problem. And it was them who clearly adopted, changed the law to kind of enact the open banking order. So, clearly then, much like Europe, we get these two new regulatory statuses, that align to the PSD2 regulation, the account information service providers and the payment initiation service providers. So, whole new kind of regulatory statuses that firms can apply for to either be able to securely and with the customer's approval obtain and kind of display their kind of banking data, and the ability to kind of trigger or initiate a payment from that kind of person's account from a kind of third-party application. And we've just seen, amazing growth, and we put a number of the logos here of the kind of AISPs and PISPs, and not just from fintechs, clearly real quality names very quickly got into the open banking movement. So big credit bureaus like Experian, and on the right hand side, right the way along, American Express, for example, in the payment space, very quickly kind of built and developed their propositions, which was really pleasing to see. So what kind of actually does this comprise? What's really good is all the UK standards are really set out clearly on the Open Banking Implementation Entities website or the OBIE website. There's an API specification, so the API standards that covers the account information retrieval and the push payments, and they're the technical blueprints, effectively covering the field specifications, the data formats, and there's a lot of focus on like the developer experience. And we know from working with fintechs in the space, we've really come to understand the importance of that developer experience, kind of like the customer experience. Developers, though, they get really excited about really clear and really kind of logical documentation. Of course, there were some, kind of gaps in the original design that have been addressed over time, and particularly enriching the payment functionality. Things like refunds, recurring payments, that kind of, important kind of features of a really compelling payment product. but it goes much beyond that, that pure API technical specification. The security standards that are available as well. So really comprehensive security standards includes a kind of a directory function within the OBIE, which manages digital certificates. And once this all got up and running in 2018, everyone knew that adoption would be slow to take off initially. But I think the uptake was even worse than a lot of people expected. And there was kind of nothing wrong with the way the standards have been set up. The technical standard was fine. And or the way that, the regulator was authorizing platforms, they were getting authorized. But the feedback on the customer experiences was really terrible. So open banking, the kind of central entity, hired customer researchers to investigate, and they found that the customer journeys were often so convoluted, it was hard even for their team to follow them. So the next step, at the top right of the slide was the open banking entity kind of mandated a set of customer journeys for each and every potential use of open banking. So now we have this, customer experience guidelines as part of the standards, which set out, in huge detail, every wireframe and lots of kind of key kind of considerations for firms to follow. And you can find a whole set of principles on there as well that the banks need to operate to around control, speed, transparency, security, trust, and those kind of factors are all referred to throughout the journeys. You can find on the website that huge kind of book of detailed wireframes for every possible journey. So the rules state, for example, if the customer's bank's app is installed on the same device that they're trying to make an open banking journey, then the device has to redirect into the banking app for authentication purposes, without introducing any additional screens. What used to happen was, it would like fire up Safari, you'd be back at the bank's home screen. It can't be that. It has to be really simple, clear, app to app redirect if that's available on the mobile format. Alongside that, lots of kind of guidance and research. And when we reflect on the kind of health of this ecosystem, it's been about setting the standards, which are set, they're in place, they're good. Building the APIs, well, that's all now kind of complete, and then really building up the ecosystem. A whole exciting set of kind of use cases for customers. Oh, I need to go back one. Oh, no. Sorry, this is terrible. So fiddly. Oh, there we go. Yeah, exactly. A whole set of use cases for customers. Enhanced underwriting using open banking data to form a better credit assessment than the bureaus can perform. So we've got players like Account Score, Credit QDOS operating that kind of model. Automating the fact find as part of a mortgage process. So players like Castlight, which was acquired by one of the big bureaus. Using the open banking data to help digitize the onboarding journey through using the bank account as a form of identity. So like TrueLayer, one of the players has a product using that form of open banking. So very quickly, when you combine the account information, the kind of ability to initiate a payment, lots of product reference data that's available, you get a really compelling set of propositions. And when we think through, what could this mean? Of course, there's been discussions for a while now that it could all get very futuristic. As we head towards the 5th million customer, do we see really dramatic proposition unbundling where many different players are kind of operating products through marketplaces? Do we see user experience entirely standalone from the regulated environment? There's a player called Tide in the UK, which is basically a kind of digital front end powered by ClearBank, a banking as a service player. So do you see more of those, that kind of disruption? Do we even see kind of, we call that their hyper switching? We've just, in the UK, the standard has just introduced variable recurring payments for sweeping of money between accounts. So do we see customers just set up an app so that they're automatically triggering their money to whichever account has the highest interest rate and just moving money around much more quickly and more dynamically than we've seen in the past? Lots of kind of exciting stuff. We'd love to really wrap up just by calling out a couple of key kind of hotspots, really, of where we're focusing work at the UK at the moment. The kind of banking market. I've talked a lot about banking. Of course, as you guys see in your region, rapid uptake in kind of digital banking propositions. Here we love a 2x2 matrix. We've categorized them by the extent of their on the y-axis. Are they API really kind of providers or consumers, and are they more in the conventional banking or in the kind of full kind of ecosystem space? Of course, all of our UK banks, by virtue of the kind of regulations, need to be at least compliant, so need to at least be kind of active in on this matrix in terms of offering and publishing the basic minimum API standards. As we move across the bottom right, the the kind of banking as a service players, really focusing on the quality of their service model through their API sets, offering a kind of full banking platform, often to new startups or newer players, giving access to processing capabilities and payment systems, etc. Perhaps one of the best examples of a full ecosystem play, N26. Lots of rich product partnerships, Clark for insurance or Og's Money for lending. So a real ecosystem play. And then, of course, we see players like Revolut, who have absolutely that focus on being a really broad set of financial services propositions, but perhaps, more of that built in-house or built, increasingly probably through acquisitions. So really interesting to see how the banks are evolving, but at the same time we just think we must not forget the more traditional kind of ability to enable back office, and really take efficiencies and kind of deliver those within the business. We've seen in Europe, an estimated $2.5 billion spent getting compliant with MiFID II, one of the big European regulations. $700 million kind of cost of kind of staying compliant and reporting with MiFID. One of our banking clients has 7,000 compliance staff. 60 to 70% of compliance work maybe being manually or largely manually performed. So often, one of our big kind of hotspot discussions is this discussion of the Regtech market, and I've set out here a number of the pillars that are kind of relevant there, from the KYC piece, the surveillance, risk management, and a bit of a size metric. So often, big conversations around how to plug in these kind of players to really help take out cost and help enable the efficiency and effectiveness of those systems. So conscious of time, I'll probably stop there if that's okay, Rodolfo, and kind of happy to take any questions.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Tom. It has been super interesting. We have a couple of questions, and I know we are short on time, so I will select only a few. From your perspective in the UK, what are your clients seeing in Latin America? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, as I said earlier, increasingly clients are kind of focused on that kind of international expansion agenda. Traditionally, the size of the UK market has perhaps kept clients in the domestic market a little bit longer than some of the other European markets, but I think that's starting to change. I think the particularly clearly firms like Revolut, some of the bigger names in the kind of neo banking or money transfer space are kind of excited and compelled by the opportunity in Latin America, and I think over time that will grow as well. From a kind of a broader base. I think clients will probably look at the market though and kind of recognise there's compelling homegrown competition as well. We've also seen founders from Latin America, like the team from Stone, set up SaltPay in Europe. So you've seen that the kind of export of real expertise from the Latin American region into Europe is kind of a major theme as well. So of course, players look and see big and exciting markets, but also probably see kind of quality of local competition and kind of weigh those equally as they think through their expansion plans.
Great, thank you, Tom. Another question is, from your global view, I'm sure that you are seeing emerging trends, for example, in similar markets, such as Africa or the southeast of Asia. What are things that we are missing here in LATAM from your perspective?
Yeah, I think this is one of the big features of the kind of government studies I mentioned earlier is the need to kind of look globally and benchmark for best practice. I think often that's can be hugely informative. It can also be it can be a little bit of a distraction in that sometimes particularly in the UK everyone gets obsessed with the kind of East Asian super apps and think, well, that must be the future. But we have to recognise that sometimes these platforms develop in a different context in terms of privacy laws, in terms of maturity of existing kind of product propositions, etc. So there's also an element of caution needed. Certainly within our latest benchmark, we spent a lot of time looking at Singapore, and we're super compelled by that kind of incredibly visionary but also collaborative government involvement and that the role of government in getting involved in really supporting and championing the sector. So I think the UK is probably in some ways kind of looking to replicate that Singaporean experience. We looked a lot at India in terms of the quality of like digital public infrastructure, in terms of like the Aadhaar system, the kind of KYC capability and kind of biometric identity capability that the government offers. But then equally, we've kind of looked a bit at the US and seen how at state level, there's just incredible kind of energy and resource from individual states on building their fintech clusters. And it just feels like almost an ever more like competitive global environment for supporting the fintechs and kind of trying to be the best place to do business. So that, that's probably a handful of the examples I'd call out, but it's definitely worth Googling moving mountains, moving mainstream. This kind of report we prepared because we looked at Singapore, Hong Kong, a bit at Canada, at North America, to kind of pull out some of those experiences.
Great, Tom. And finally, a parting reflection more. You work a lot with incumbents, both in the retail banking and insurance. Yeah. And you mentioned in your conversation that they are trying different approaches. Yeah. What would be your reflection on moving ahead, on trying, on letting go and just taking a toe deep into the fintech space?
Yeah, I'd absolutely encourage that. And we think the best, our kind of leading clients who are moving the quickest now, it's not about buying software, it's about kind of combination of fintech partnership and digital engineering to really drive and deliver more rapid kind of product growth. I do think, I go back to that framework for partnership. I think that the structured thinking is important. Finding the right partners is important in terms of firms with the right level of at the right stage of development to be, seriously able to work with a big financial institution. Often in the early days, some of those fintechs, their best clients are other fintechs, while they start to develop the proposition and build it up. So Often we find that firms, look for slightly more mature partners. Not always the case, but often the case. We've seen kind of investment, corporate venturing, kind of investment into those firms being a powerful way of kind of aligning interests and kind of getting often a seat on the board of those fintechs. And we've seen, most critically perhaps, the role of kind of the right form of sponsorship and support from the financial institution to really work with and partner with the fintech. So often a senior individual to really take responsibility for that relationship and nurture and develop that that kind of role. And often we've seen senior execs from the banking sector, as they move on or retire, take on senior board roles at regtechs or fintechs and support them throughout that kind of B2B sales and growth journey. So I think it's a huge topic. It might be worth a kind of webinar in itself, but hugely exciting if you're able to combine the best of tech from the fintech world with the power of and customer base of the big financial institutions.
It sounds like a combination. It's better working together. This has been an amazing conversation. We want to thank you, Tom, and we want to thank the audience. Once again, we apologize for the tech glitch, but it has been fantastic to share this time with you. You can connect with us, both with Tom or me or the event organizers, and have a great Thursday. Thank you so much.